Module 1 is about introduction to philosophy and in general and the study of ethics. Okay? By the way, no, seldom do I use PowerPoint presentations in this kind of session. Since clarification lang yan, no? Repetition lang yung mangyayari kung i-PowerPoint ko yung nasa readings na. Okay? Now, so the first module, no, I hope you watched the YouTube interview of JJ Joaquin. No? JJ Joaquin is tropa, no? Tropa ko si JJ Joaquin, no? He was initially one of my professors in PhD, no, when I was taking up my PhD units. The interview of JJ is just an addition, no? It's just a creative way of maybe putting into live video the contents of Module 1. In particular, the first part, where he discussed what is philosophy. Now, I'd like to highlight that philosophy studies everything. Okay? Everything. Kaya nga, if ang biruan namin, no, if you want a course which studies everything and not just numbers or plants, you go to philosophy. But what we mean by everything when we say philosophy, when we say that philosophy studies everything, no, it has parameters. And I believe it is summarized in the definition of Dr. Festin, which if you have read the module, you have encountered that name. No? Lawrence Festin was one of my teachers when I was in college. He would summarize philosophy as the study of everything according to its ultimate explanation in the light of reason. We study everything, yes, but we study everything in order for us to know the foundations of things. Okay? We can study here plants, we can study here numbers, but we study them in unlocking what's behind these things. So for example, if we would like to study numbers philosophically, we're not after the correctness of arithmetic. We're not after the correctness of solutions. But for example, we could ask, are numbers real? Or are they just representations of the facts about the world? If you think of it, we think sometimes through numbers. Even our notion of time, we think by numbers. So for example, gaano kalayo ang campus sa SM Calamba? Normally, we Filipinos do not think by the length or the distance rather. No, hindi natin sinasabi, it's like maybe 10 kilometers from UP Los Baños. It's uncommon for us Filipinos to think like that. Maybe, ang mas madalas, siguro pag walang traffic, 30 minutes. Pag may traffic, SM Calamba to Los Baños, give it 1 hour. So what are numbers really? No? Do they represent real things of this world? Or do they just aid us into articulating what we mean in this world? Okay? That is an example. And so there is a tendency for people to label philosophy as useless. Okay? Because especially in Filipino culture, when you're labeled a pilosopo, no? There's this negative image nakakambal ng pagiging pilosopo. No? Yung maipaglaban lang kung anong gusto mo kahit mali. You know? Maipaglaban lang. In fact, when you're labeled pilosopo ka, that is somehow derogatory sometimes. Diba? Hindi siya maganda pakinggan. Now, this is just one. No? This is just one reason bakit pangit ang treatment ng philosophy within our country. Another reason is that philosophy, the value of philosophy is not so much on quantity. It's not so much on productivity. When we say value in mathematics, value demands numbers. Okay? When we say value, may numero yan. But in the article of Bertrand Russell, he says that the value of philosophy should not be sought in its productivity. Rather, in the questions philosophy tries to articulate. Um, Another way of putting philosophy is that philosophy is like a therapy. It 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 uh, it it helps the mind to grapple at things which are sometimes left unquestioned. Have you ever thought what makes a human human? Have you ever thought of that question? Pag sinabi ba nating tao, is it just the composition of organs? Or is it just the thinking thing? No? That is something, pag sinabi mong ang tao ay tao, dahil siya'y nakapag-iisip, papaano yung mga comatose? They do not exhibit signs of thinking. So, does it mean na ang comatose ay hindi tao because hindi siya nakapag-iisip at the moment? So, if we just label, for example, human is human as long as it is rational, edi hindi rin human ang mga 1 to 3-year-old babies. Because they do not exhibit rationality as much as we do right now. Okay? So, at a glance, parang ang daling sagutin ng what makes a human human. But if you think of it, it's the answer to the question is actually complex. No? Mahirap sagutin. Okay? That is why Bertrand Russell would say, the value of philosophy should be sought not in the answers, but in the questions it poses. Okay? Why? Because questions actually enlarge our notion of what is possible for the world. I think I added an example in the module, no, about artificial intelligence. In the 1950s, Alan Turing would ask the question, can machines think? Back in the 1950s, it was unthinkable that machines can think like humans. No? But of course, no, we know history. Because of that question of Alan Turing, scientists were intrigued, and so we have now today computers. But now the question is more complex than ever. Are machines capable of intelligence? And that is, of course, the artificial intelligence. But of course, the question does not end there. If, for example, there will be a time in the world where machines can be intelligent. By intelligent, we mean can think for itself. No? Tayo, we are intelligent. By the token that we are able to process the things we perceive in the world. We are able to make decisions. No? Kapag ba ang artificial intelligence magkaroon na mismo ng human faculty, emotion, reason, memory, and so forth and so on, ang philosophical question dyan ay, meron na bang rights ang isang artificial intelligence? If you're watching Black Mirror, isa yun sa mga themes ng Black Mirror, no? Kapag ba ang isang artificial intelligence naging taong-tao na, as in 1:1, no? Can we accord rights to robots? Now, if we accord rights to robots the same as our rights, kapag nagdesisyon na, sino ang mas matimbang ang karapatan? Robot o yung tao? Would it be moral to enslave a robot? No? Kasi tayo, at I'm sure lahat naman tayo dito, we would agree that slavery is something not moral. It's something not acceptable because it violates human dignity. But you know, robots, those with higher artificial intelligence are there actually for humans to enslave them, to perform tasks which can aid humanity. But if we enslave them and if they have these human tokens, by tokens I mean rationality, emotion, memory, and so forth and so on, moral na ba na alilain natin yung mga robot? So you see, the question actually progresses. Kaya nga sabi sa maganda nga yung sabi sa Pilipino, no? Matalino ang taong nagtatanong. As long as the questions are with sense. So that's the importance of philosophy in a nutshell. I would like to highlight, maybe you had a hard time understanding what Russell means by self and not self. Okay? Isa yan sa mga common na mahirap intindihin dun sa essay na yan. Now, what is the self? We can say that the self is me. Not self is anything that is not me. No? Very simple as that. So, I am Nico, this is myself. For example, Cristel Bermas. Cristel Bermas is, to my view, a not self. Because Miss Bermas, or sino pa ba mga nandito? Josiah, Alphonse, they are not me. Self, not self. Ano pa yung mga not self? Environment. What Russell is trying to pin here in this article is that philosophy actually helps us to understand where other persons or other things are coming from. It actually calls us to an ethical response. Na ang mundo ay hindi lang umiikot sa self. And philosophy is actually there to help you, the self, to sort of have an ethical relationship with others and other things. Okay? I hope you get that point of Russell. In philosophy, one way of one topic ay nung senior high school kayo, I'm sure meron kayong topic na ganito, no? Intersubjectivity, if you remember. No? Intersubjectivity is a relation with others. Okay? By the way, if you have questions, you can just simply unmute, no? If you have questions along the way. Okay? So, I think that sums up Module 1. No? What is philosophy? What is the value of philosophy? And what is the philosophical attitude? I think by the way, no, the first part of Module 1, I'm the author of that. I think I'm pretty straightforward, no, in that short essay, no? Especially the part on the attitude of a philosopher. Okay? Welcoming and yet skeptic. Okay? By skepticism, I mean, hindi siya panghabang buhay na skeptic ka. To a certain extent, you need to have some sort of certainty about things. Hindi naman lahat ng bagay dapat pagdudahan. No? For example, 1 + 1 = 2, hindi mo na kailangan pagdudahan yan. No? At mas lalong kabalintunaan kung sabi mo, 1 + 1, sir, 1.5 lang kasi heartbroken ako. Oh, hindi. No? You need to have some sort of certainty with these things. Okay? Okay? So that's for philosophy. No? What is philosophy in general? So, philosophy is not pupunta ka sa ilalim ng puno, magmumuni-muni ka tungkol sa mundo. That's not philosophy. No? If that is how you learn philosophy in senior high school, have mercy on your soul. No, that's not philosophy. Okay? There's a question, no, from one of the participants. How does philosophy make a person realize the truth? Is it only for pure reason or just mere observation of patterns in the world? Good question. Now, with regards to truth, no, we need to discuss, no, what do you mean by truth? Because as I've said in the article, we can have so many definitions of truth. For example, mathematical truth, 1 + 1 = 2. Theological truths about God. Although some truths, like for example in theology, they claim it as true, but it's open for discussion. Now, how does philosophy make a person realize the truth? I think the answer lies in my latter discussion there, that philosophy helps us, number one, to be open about ideas, but at the same time to be picky, no? Mapili about what ideas to subscribe to. Okay? Now, with regards to the sub-question, is it only for pure reason or just mere observations of patterns in the world? Now, the first part, pure reason, ang tawag dyan sa philosophy, rationalism. No? Para sa mga rationalists, naniniwala sila na ang katotohanan tungkol sa mundo can be learned just by pure reason without referring to observable things. Dito magaling yung mga philosophers na naniniwala tungkol sa Diyos. For example, we know for sure, I think hanggang ngayon, no, inform me if meron ng physical manifestation ang Diyos sa mundo. Sa huling pagkakaalam ko, wala pa naman. God in general, not the Christian God. No? Now, how do philosophers theorize on God's existence? Isang popular example dito ay yung argument from design. Na ang lahat daw ng bagay sa mundo ay may order. And that order cannot come from nothing. That order must come from something. Take note the words, no? That order must come from something. That conclusion, must, is not something you observe in the world. It's something you process in your reason. No? Kahit walang observable things, you can conclude to that. And you can sound without being illogical. Kasi naman, sa mundo natin, things have causes. Okay? Kaya ka nag-aaral ngayon, kaya ka nasa klaseng ito, because you were informed of a schedule. That's a cause. And there's that schedule because there's the author of that schedule, me. So, sa madaling sabi, everything in the world has causes. That is something we can hold to. Lahat ng bagay may causes. But, meron kayang ultimate cause? Yan, no? Diyan naglalaro ngayon yung mga philosophers. Okay? On one hand, you cannot just simply rely on reason. Because we are beings endowed with senses. And our day-to-day life, our day-to-day activities are governed with senses. You cannot process the truth that I'm mentioning in this class without using your senses. And so, philosophers from the past have really argued whether we get knowledge from pure reason or through the help of observable world. But the discussion for that would take an entire semester. I cannot capture everything in this minutes. Okay? But at least I opened the idea about truth and how we arrive at truth. Okay? Are there questions before I move to the next portion? You can unmute or you can... Okay, there's another question, but I will tackle that in the next portion, in ethics. Introduction to ethics. Okay? Okay, let me proceed with the next. Unless there are questions, you can unmute. Okay. Okay. I proceed to the next. So the next portion of the module is about ethics in general. Okay? As I've said last time when I introduced the subject, ethics is not your GMRC subject. This is not a subject where I will prescribe to you, ito yung dapat gawin. This is not the subject. Okay? Now, Ethics, if I will summarize the definitions and the ideas present in that module, ethics is an inspection of our moral claims. In ethics, we weigh whether our moral claims and our norms are founded in reason. Or, the simple question, saan ba nanggagaling ang ating mga moral claims? What are the basis for that? Okay? So, merong tatlong uri ng pag-aaral ng ethics, no? Normative, pinag-aaralan dito yung mga particular theories. That is the first. Most of the time, this course will be normative in nature. The second is meta-ethical. Later on, I will discuss to you isang claim ng isang meta-ethical theory. And then applied, no? Applied ethics. Now, at this point, I'd like to somehow creatively convey to you ano ba ang ginagawa sa ethics. Okay? For a moment. Let me just prepare the screen I'll be sharing. Okay, I'll call volunteer. No, this is an interactive sort of Bandersnatch na presentation. Okay.
Meet Joy. She's tasked by Mayor Bailon to lead the clearing operations for the road widening project. However, this project would lead
Kita ba? Sorry, hindi ko na-check.
Yes po.
Kita
Okay,
po.
thank you.
Hindi po masyado rinig.
Hindi po, masyadong marinig yung audio.
Medyo mahina.
Okay. Wait.
Do you think she's right because she followed the mayor's
Wait lang.
orders?
I think I do not have control with the audio. Let me try again. Wala akong control sa audio, no, because this is I did not do this, no. It's a project by some group of ethics professors, but let's see if you can bear with the audio. Just use headphones or whatever.
Meet Joy. She's tasked by Mayor Bailon to lead the clearing operations for the road widening project. However, this project would leave hundreds of informal settlers with nowhere to go. Despite sad circumstances, Joy still implemented the project anyway, because this is what the mayor wants. Do you think Joy's decision is right? Do you think she's right because she followed the mayor's orders? Do you think her decision is wrong because she just left the informal sectors homeless?
Okay, so sa mga mahirap marinig, no, there is a moral dilemma. Okay? We have Joy, no, the one in the construction
Let's think about it.
cup. There's a project by the mayor, but the project would entail removing informal settlers to give way for the project. So we are given two options. Okay? si Joy, she continued the project, no? She removed the informal settlers and to give way to the project of the mayor. Okay? So there are two options here.
Let's think about it.
How about the audio right now? Mas lumakas ba?
Wala po.
Mahina
Wala
pa.
Mahina pa rin po,
So,
sir.
yung file talaga yung problem. Anyway. So, yun yung moral dilemma, no? Tinuloy ni Joy yung project na inutos ni Mayor. So, we're given now two options, no? A and B. Let me call a random Mr. Hernandez. Green na green yung upuan mo. Yan, favorite color ko yan. Eh. So if you're given the chance, no, anong pipiliin mo dyan? What do you think?
I think she's wrong because she left the informal settlers homeless.
Okay, so let's click letter B.
If you choose B, then you don't think that Joy has reasons for her decision.
Okay, so sa mga hindi nakakarinig, you choose B because you think Joy Joy made a wrong judgment. Okay, so let's try to see what's next.
It's time for Moral Minute. Joy implemented the project because the mayor told her. But this kind of moral standard is highly questionable. According to moral particularists like Jonathan Dancy, actions cannot simply be based on general moral standards. Basing one's action to a principle that it is right to obey people in authority would be wrong in particular cases. For Dancy, instead of general principles, choosing the right course of action depends on what particular situations demand. We have learned in this lesson how moral principles and standards justify our decisions and actions. But in the case of moral particularism, we must also be wary of them. In Joy's case, the moral principle, we ought to obey our superiors, would be wrong. So, do you think Joy's decision is still right? Let's talk about it.
Okay, so the discussion is this one. Joy may have chosen to obey the mayor because meron siyang personal conviction na dapat sundin ang authority. Okay? But in that case, kaya siguro ang pinili ni Mr. Hernandez ay yung letter B. Nagkamali si Joy na paalisin yung informal settlers. Maybe the reason behind that is not everything that is commanded to us should be followed. And this is what is called moral particularism. That each situation that demands an ethical choice must be treated differently from other situations. So, hindi mag-work yung mga general statements na dapat sundin ng authority in the case of Joy. Or dapat pangalagaan ang we should always think for the good of the greatest number. Yan. So hindi siya mag-work, no? Because moral particularists like the example Jonathan Dancy, hindi siya naniniwala doon. Dapat daw i-treat ang each situation differently. So that's a snippet of what we are doing in ethics. We inspect, we try to wrap our heads around the issue, no? Around standards. Dito natin malalaman kung tama ba yung mga moral principles natin. Last week, di ba, I asked you to give your moral principles. Tama is a wrong word. Kung may sense ba, kung makatwiran ba yung mga moral principles. For example, if you are a person or if you are a politician and you're operating on the principle that the greatest good for the greatest number must be preserved. Meaning, anumang gawain, basta it preserves the goodness of majority, dapat yun ang susundin. But let's take, for example, death penalty. For example, you are a politician and you want death penalty because for you, the greatest good for the greatest number is espoused in death penalty. You pick one wrong member of the community, execute him so that the general public might be preserved. In particular, drugs, di ba? May panukala na mag-death penalty ng drugs because drug is a menace and it poisons the majority of Filipinos. So we can say that we could operate on that. Kailangan ng death penalty because I want to preserve the greatest good for a greater number of persons. The question is, makatwiran ba yung ganoong pagre-reason out? Okay? So yan yung mga samples ng problema sa ethics. Okay? Now, let's deal with morality versus etiquette. I'm sure you know what etiquette is, di ba? Wag kakain, wag magsasalita when your mouth is full, and so forth and so on. Okay? Wag maingay kapag humihigop ng sabaw. No? Sa Pilipino or sa Western culture, ano yan, tabu. No? Hihigop ka tapos maingay. Pero sa Japanese, it's a sign na nasasarapan ka dun actually sa dish. Okay? Or one example na classic sa Filipino culture, pagpapaupo sa babae sa public transpo. That's an etiquette. No? Let me share you an example, as a personal experience to that effect. When I was still doing my master's degree in LaSalle, one Saturday, I had to go to Ayala Triangle in Makati. Okay? So, sasakay ka ng bus sa tapat ng LaSalle na Ayala na may dumadaang bus. When I rode the bus, kukonti yung laman. No? And so, I fell asleep because ang klase ko sa LaSalle dati, 9 a.m. to 8 p.m. Sa grad school. So, after 8, I rode the bus going to Ayala. Nakatulog ako. And then, nung kakana na sa Ayala part, nasa Buendia Road, napuno na pala yung bus. So, may sumakay na isang kolehiyala from a school dun sa area na yan. I don't know bakit sa akin siya tumapat. At tinitigan niya ako. And sinabi niya na, magpaupo ka naman, kalalaki mong tao. Na-trigger ako. Sabi ko, Miss, senior citizen ka ba? Hindi. Sabi niya, hindi, obviously. Mataray pa si ate girl mo. Tapos sabi ko, PWD po ba kayo? Kasi pauupuin ko po kayo. Ayoko nang tanongin kung buntis, baka lalong mainsulto. Tapos, after those questioning, sabi niya, huwag kang ang pilosopo, wala kang manners. Pilosopo talaga ako. So, pinakita ko yung form ko sa LaSalle. Actually, miss, I'm a master student in philosophy. Tumalikod si ate girl mo at siguro may pinuntir yung ibang pasahero. Now, the question is this. That is an etiquette, Yung pagpapaupo ng babae sa bus when you're a guy. But, kapag ba hindi mo sinunod yung etiquette na yan, for some reason, are you already immoral? That's the question. What I had in mind is that kung PWD ka, paupuin kita. Kung buntis ka, magpapaupo ako at mas lalo kung senior citizen. But at that moment, we are of equal footing. So happen na kolehiyala siya, ba't pareho kami estudyante? At pareho kaming pagod sa araw na yun? Porket ba babae, ay dapat nang paupuin ng lalaki? That is a divisive question. Some guys would say, yes, even, lalo na yung mga boomer. Hindi ko nila lahat ng mga boomer, Some. But to my mind, I think, for me, hindi siya dapat gawing rule or norm. No? Dahil pare-pareho ang kapasidad ng tao, almost pare-pareho ang kapasidad ng tao mapagod. No? So, tama ba yung kalalaki mong tao, ayaw mong magpaupo? Tama kaya yun? No? Later on, i-discuss natin yung supererogatory ethics. No? Ethics that call for actions that are beyond your duty. Baka doon pasok. Pero sa case na yun, dapat ba nagpaupo ako? No, that's the question. Now, what I'm saying is that morality is not the same as etiquette. Okay? And etiquette is not the same as morality. Not all etiquettes are moral. Ano bang isang etiquette? Huwag kang magpapatong ng elbow sa dining table pag kumakain ka. Does it mean na kapag hindi mo sinunod yon, masama ka ng tao at karapat-dapat ka nang sunugin sa dagat-dagatang apoy ng impyerno? Hindi naman siguro. No? I hope you get my point on that. Not all etiquettes are moral. No? But not all moral things are espousing etiquette also. No? For example, yung nasa party ka, may dress code. Merong nahulog na babae sa pool. Ang etiquette sa party na yon dapat naka-full, no? Naka-full suit ka, So, you violated the etiquette by acting morally kasi para sa tingin mo yun yung moral call mo. Moral ka, pero you violated the etiquette. But it could also happen that some etiquettes become normative and hence moral. Huh? For example, yung pagpapauna sa babae, no? Pagpapauna sa babae sa transportation, we could say na nagiging moral norm siya. Kung ikaw yung asawa. No? Kasi pangangalagaan mo yung babae. That is the point precisely of the article of Sumner. No? Yung mga mores, hindi mores yan mores, yung mga gawain na nanggagaling sa folkways, mga gawa, no? Ay nagiging accepted ng mas malaking community and therefore nagiging batas siya. If you think of it, some of our laws actually, we can deduce that from folkways. Nalaman ng matatanda na nung mga sinaunang mga tao na hindi yata okay pumatay kasi masakit. Masakit dun sa pinapatay. No? So nag-isip sila na dapat hindi ka manakit ng kapwa mo gamit ang sibat kasi hindi na siya pala nahinga. Imagine the setting back that time. Walang formal language. No? Signals lang. So sinibat nila yung kapwa nila, napansin nila na nasaktan. Try na nilang sibatin yung sarili nila. Kung masakit, nasaktan sila. And so the folkways are, wag mong gagamitin ng sibat against that, yung kamukha mo. May. Huh? Now, the folkways in turn become mores. Nagiging kostumbre siya ng isang grupo ng mga tao. And therefore, it is accepted. Okay? And then it becomes a law. Okay? We can trace some of our laws actually in that pattern. Kaya nga, for example, yung mores, yan ang root word ng morality. Okay? Morality is a set of norms, accepted good, notions of good in a certain context. The same also can be said of ethics, which comes from ethos. No? I'm sure nasa reading yan. Okay? Now, let's discuss morality versus law. Okay? Now, you know for sure by this time that morality is not the same as law. For example, mamamatay na yung nanay mo. You are the driver. Ikaw yung marunong mag-drive. Susugod mo yung nanay mo sa ospital. And you had to drive 120 kilometers per hour para lang umabot yung nanay mo. Ngayon, nahuli ka. No? Nahuli ka. This is especially true sa America, no? Yung mga first world country, di ba? Walang non-contact apprehension. Malalaman mo na lang may summons ka na sa korte. No? Tapos pag-i-explain ka sa korte. You violated the law? Yes. Because nag-speed ka, 120. Pero, masasabi bang immoral ka? Hindi siguro. Kasi you did the action in order to save yung nanay mo na nag-aagaw buhay. Okay? Now, meron din namang mga batas na hindi moral. No? For example, I don't know if you watch Napoles, no, nung Senate congressional Senate hearings. Diba? Napoles was so evasive of the questions. And she would, from time to time, invoke her right against self-incrimination. No? Si Mocha Uson din ginamit yan, kaya lang nagkamali-mali siya. No? Anyway, going back. Napoles would from time to time invoke her right against self-incrimination because anything that she will deliver can be used against her. Is it legal? Yes. It is lawful to invoke your right against self-incrimination. But is it moral? Yan ang debate. Bakit? Bakit pwede siyang sabing hindi moral? Kasi itong si Napoles, ginasta niya, allegedly, ang pera ng taong bayan through the PDAF scandal. No? We can argue na yes, she was lawful in using her rights. That's her right. But as to using her right, she also is being moral in that sense. We can question that. Okay? I'm not slandering Janet Napoles, no. I'm using Janet Napoles here as a prop for my point, no. I'm not trying to malign or to libel, no, Janet Napoles, no. Again, for educational purposes. Okay? Kung may kasalanan ba si Janet Napoles, that is out of the question. Okay? Now, but some laws, we can argue, are based on moral claims. For example, there's a law that prohibits indiscriminate burning. Pagsusunog. Okay? We can say that that law is based on morality. I have a moral obligation na hindi magkasakit ang kapitbahay ko. Hindi magkasakit ang household ko. And so, a law must be passed para mas maging definite itong moral standard na ito. Saan siya nanggagaling? Pwede nating sabihin greatest good for the greatest number pa rin. There's a law that prohibits indiscriminate burning because we can argue that it comes from the principle para sa nakararami itong batas na to. Okay? Again, not all laws are based on morality, but some laws we can trace from moral claims. Okay? We cannot say that all legal things are moral things. Why? We must realize that the ones who are making the laws of this land are congresspersons, solons, representatives of the people. And so we cannot avoid the fact that they have their personal interests when making these laws. For example, the law according a certain company the right to transmit broadcast media. Di ba? Merong mga instances na binibigyan ng franchise ng Kongreso dahil may kikita na politiko. You see, the motive for the building or for the creation of that law is self-interest. And we can question, therefore, its morality. Again, these examples show that not everything that is legal is automatically moral. Okay? Now, let's discuss morality and religion. Okay? Isa ito sa mga meta-ethical question. Saan nanggagaling ang good and bad? One answer is that it comes from God. But we can question that, no? In the book of Plato, no, Euthyphro, no? Socrates asked a guy, no? Do the gods love goodness because it is good? Or is it good because the gods love it? That's the question. The question is, what is goodness? Tapos merong nagmamarunong na nagsasabi kay Socrates na there is goodness because there is a God. Or there are gods rather, no? Yung kultura ni Socrates is Greek, no? Yung mga Greek gods. Kaya daw may goodness kasi may mga Diyos. Ngayon, tinanong ni Socrates, do the gods love goodness because it is good, or is it good because the gods love it? Ano yung point ng question ni Socrates? Kung merong good sa mundo dahil merong Diyos na nagdidikta kung ano ang good, ibig sabihin, posible na dahil ang Diyos ay Diyos, pwede niyang sabihin hindi masama ang pumatay dahil siya ang Diyos. Ang pagpatay na mabuti. That's the first question, no? Do the gods love goodness? That's the second part rather. Is it good because gods love it? One way of translating the question is that, kaya ba yan mabuti kasi utos ng Diyos? Kung ang kabutihan ay dahil lang sa utos ng Diyos, the argument is that even killing, as long as God wills it, will be considered good. The other side of the question is this. Do the gods love goodness because it is good? Kaya ba may goodness sa mundo dahil nandiyan na yan? At ang ginagawa lang ng Diyos ay to implement goodness. Again, this is problematic. Bakit? Sinasabi ng question na kung ang sagot mo ay yung question na yun, no, yung merong goodness, ang ginagawa lang ng Diyos ay i-implement yung goodness sa mundo. It means na ang good ay hindi pala gawa ng Diyos. Bakit siya problematic? Kasi ang Diyos, ang notion natin ng Diyos, omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent. No? Ibig pala sabihin, walang control ang Diyos sa good. Ito yung good, ito yung Diyos, ang ginagawa lang ng Diyos, i-distribute yung goodness sa mundo. So kahit yung Diyos, wala siyang control dun sa good. Okay? Again, to summarize, no? The question has problems. Number one, if we say that God wills that which is good, we can say that as long as God wills it, He can permit killing and label it as good. After all, that is God. The second problem is Okay, sorry. I think nakat ako. Saan ako, Miguel? Sorry, can someone? Nagka-problema ata yung connection ko. Can someone speak and say kung...
Summarize po,
Second
sir, nung
problem.
dalawang problem po.
Second. So the second problem is it questions the very existence of God. No? Kasi ibig sabihin hindi niya gawa yung good, ini-implement lang niya sa mundo. So it questions the very existence of God, whether this God is really powerful. Okay? Now, why is religion problematic if we base our morality in it? The moral pronouncements of religion, for example, Christianity, are general and imprecise. For example, the Ten Commandments tell us, "Thou shall not kill." Okay? Tapos ang sabi pa, "Love your enemies, pray for them." Does it mean na kapag sinutsok-tsak na ako ng kaaway ko, no, I should still love them? No? The point is, walang question kung halimbawa naniniwala ka kay Jesus. Walang question doon. But the question is, pag sinabi ba ni Lord, for example, na do not kill, love your enemies, does it mean na kapag papatayin na ako, ay wala akong gagawin? Okay? Or, babaan natin, no? Babaan natin yung example. Kapag ba ninanakawan ako, should I love still my enemy? The point is, walang prescription. For example, ang Bible, kung papaano tayo gagalaw kapag binibigyan na tayo ng injustice ng iba. No? Di mamamatay ka na lang na tatanggapin mo lang lahat ng injustisya sa buhay. I think that violates also the commandment of God when He says, love your neighbor, uphold their dignity. No? Ikaw rin bilang tao, may dignidad ka. Okay? So, problema yun para sa religion. Last problem. Maraming problema sa morality versus religion. I'm just laying on general problems. One problem is that, who speaks for God? No? Who speaks for God? No? For example, when the Catholic Church says contraception is immoral, what is their guarantee in saying that that particular thing is immoral? Who speaks for God? That's one question. Finally, ethical relativism. Okay? There are two forms here. Individual ethical relativism or subjectivism, and then ethical cultural relativism. Okay? Bakit questionable? Marami akong narinig na ganito nung first day natin, no? Na relative ang tama sa mali, no? Dapat magrespetuhan lang tayo. Okay. Let me give you examples that might shock your moral principle. One, a policeman killing a suspected drug user. If we invoke subjectivism, dapat hindi tayo magalit dun sa pulis. Kasi pinairal ng pulis yung kanyang judgment call. Okay? Kung naniniwala tayo na relative ang lahat ng mga moral truths at walang moral truths pala. No? So, kung may pulis na pumatay dahil ang judgment call niya ay dapat patayin itong drug user na ito at hindi bigyan ng kahit na anumang form of due process, we should not question the policeman if we believe in subjectivism. Okay? Another example on cultural relativism. Cultural relativism says, no, there's a different set of right and wrong, good and bad in every culture. If you're familiar with Adolf Hitler, no, nagkaroon ng national consciousness ang mga Aleman na ang mga Hudyo ay salot sa lipunan. That is their culture that time. If we say that cultural relativism is correct we should not question the horrible actions of Hitler because that is cultural. A culture killing another culture or people, genocide. Kung tama ang cultural relativism, dapat wag nating questionin si Adolf Hitler. You get, I hope you get the point. No? Kapag sinabi natin subjective lahat ng bagay, wala ka dapat ikagalit kapag may pumatay dahil judgment call niya, moral call niya. Kung totoo ang cultural relativism, wala tayo dapat ikagalit sa mga nasyon na pumapatay at nananakop ng ibang bansa dahil yun ang dikta ng kanilang kultura. Okay? But, why is relativism attractive? Number one, the diversity argument. Iba-iba tayo, respetuhan na lang. Two, dependency argument. Dependency argument is very simple. Anumang good and bad sa isang lipunan ay nakadepende sa kultura and therefore we must respect that. And third, tolerance. We must show understanding to other cultures. So on one hand, ang hirap tanggapin ng subjectivism and cultural relativism, but on the other hand, parang attractive siya. Parang yun na lang yung way para peaceful ang lahat. But the question is, are we ready to suffer, to push relativism and subjectivism to the limits, even to the point of violating human dignity? Okay? So, problematic siya. Okay? Last point before I entertain questions and eventually end this session. Who is the moral person? Remember that in ethics, ethics would only make sense as long as there is this moral agent. The one who is accountable to the things. Walang saysayang ethics kung walang pupurihin at kung walang sisisihin. No? The question is, who is a moral agent? Okay? Who has moral rights? Who has moral obligations? Because if we say, tao lamang ang may moral rights and obligations, does it mean na ang isang comatose, meron siyang moral right and obligation kahit wala siyang kapasidad na maging moral? Or yung mga taong hindi nakapag-iisip ng tama, may mental condition? Or even 1-year-old, 2-year-old baby. Can you call a 2-year-old baby immoral? Punta tayo sa mga pamangkin nyo, oy, immoral ka. Pwede kaya yun? Okay? So, this is a debated question. Who has moral rights and obligations? Maraming mga theory na maraming mga schools of thought, no? Sabi, magkakaroon lamang ng moral right ang isang entity kung humihinga siya, kung meron siyang katwiran, kung meron siyang kalayaang mamili. But if we limit to those three, mawawalan ng rights ang mga hayop. Kasi ang mga hayop hindi nakapag-reason out. Okay? So, maraming mga schools of thought, pero commonly, sabi, dapat merong pandama para magkaroon ng moral right. Okay? Dapat may buhay. Pero debatable even yung buhay, no? Kasi, for example, sa case ng abortion, no? Isang school of thought nagsasabi, ang fetus sa loob ng sinapupunan ay walang moral right dahil hindi siya considered na tao. No? Only humans daw can be accorded moral rights. So, these questions we will tackle along the way this semester. Okay? So this is just an introduction, a very broad introduction of philosophy and ethics.